Rejected for her stutter, she was put back on the Eastbound with a one-word note. The note said stay. That's all. One word, penciled on the back of a freight manifest, folded once, handed to the conductor by a man named Harlan Pruitt, a man who owned 11,000 acres of the San Luis Valley and apparently could not tolerate a woman who got caught on a word now and then. The conductor told me this himself, 3 days later, over a cup of coffee at the Alamosa Depot. Said the woman had sat the whole return trip with that note in her lap, reading it the way you read something you don't yet believe. I wasn't there when she got on that train. I was up in the cut at Cerro, dealing with a blowout in the tunnel cribbing, my hands full of cold iron and another man's blood still drying on my boot. But I knew about her the way you know about things in a rail camp, second-hand and incomplete and probably half wrong. A mail-order woman, come out from Ohio or somewhere like it, brought west to be Pruitt's wife. Sent back before the first night was done. The note wasn't from Pruitt. I need to say that plainly because the way it sounds, you'd think he had a change of heart. He didn't. The note was from his housekeeper, a Tejana woman named Dolers who had worked for Pruitt 11 years and in that time developed her own opinions about him. She'd seen the bride step down from the Eastbound, watched the whole hour of it, dinner, Pruitt's face going tight, the carriage back to the depot, the bride's trunk still sitting in the foyer when it was over. Dolers had written the note herself and paid the conductor $1 to hold it until the train was moving. She told me that later, too. I'm getting ahead of myself. I do that. It's the way I carry a story, grab the part that matters first, then go back and lay the road to it. Maggie always said that about me. Said I'd tell you the end of a thing and then spend an hour explaining how we got there. She said it like it was a flaw. After a while it started to sound like something she kept close, because she knew the shape of it. And knowing the shape of a man's flaw is something like knowing him. But that's later. I have to go back to Cerro first. My name is Emmett Crane, and in the fall of 1882 I was section foreman for the Denver and Rio Grande, working the narrow gauge through the San Luis Valley. 44 years old. I had been doing this work in one form or another since I was 22, first as a spike driver in Kansas, then as a grader boss in Colorado, then here. I was good at it. I knew how to read ground, read weather, read the mood of men who hadn't slept and had blisters where the skin used to be. I knew how to hold a crew together when the company was late with pay and the winter was not. What I didn't know how to do was stop. I mean that in the practical sense. I did not know how to lay down the work and sit still. My wife had left me 2 years before that fall, not left me for another man, not left me in anger, just left, the way water leaves a basin when the seal goes. She said I was always somewhere else in my head, said she'd married a ghost and was tired of setting a plate for him. I didn't fight her on it. That was probably its own answer. After that I worked. It's all I did. Cerro, Antonito, the cuts near Trestle Canyon, wherever the company pointed me I went, and when the day was done I ate alone and slept 4 or 5 hours and started again. The men respected me. The company trusted me. I had a reputation for getting the job in on schedule and under estimate, which in the railroad business in 1882 was worth more than most things. I owned nothing but my tools, a canvas bag of clothes, and a sorrow I couldn't name exactly. Not grief, not loneliness, something quieter than both, like a room you used to go into that's been locked so long you've stopped walking past it. I first saw Maggie Walsh 4 days after she'd been put back on the Eastbound. She had not gone east. This is what I found out later. She'd ridden the train as far as Alamosa, and then she'd gotten off. Not because she had a plan. She had $8 and a trunk and a comb with 2 broken teeth. She got off because the thought of going back to Ohio, to her sister's house, to the bedroom with the narrow window, to being the woman who couldn't hold a husband, was a worse thing than whatever she might find if she stayed put. So she stayed put. She found work at the rail depot commissary within the hour. The woman who ran it, a widow named Mrs. Faber, Needed someone to take inventory and mind the counter on Thursdays. Maggie could write a clean hand and count without an abacus, and she had enough sense not to explain herself beyond what was asked. Mrs. Faber hired her for room and board and $2 a week. When I came into that commissary on a Thursday afternoon needing lamp oil and a new whetstone, Maggie Walsh was behind the counter writing figures in a ledger, and she looked up and said, "H help you." Not the way some people say it, where the catch is so long it becomes the whole sound. Just one small trip at the start and then the word followed clean behind it. I noticed it the way you notice a stone in the road, registered it, stepped around it, moved on. I told her what I needed. She found the lamp oil right off and spent a minute locating the whetstone in the back room. When she came out, she set it on the counter and said the price, and I paid it. I was halfway to the door when I turned back, though I couldn't have told you why. "You just get here," I said. She looked at me steady. "Couple D-days. You need work past Thursdays. The camp cook's wife does laundry for the crew. I can put in a word if you want it." She studied me a moment, not suspicious exactly, more like she was checking the ground before she stepped. "What does it pay?" $1.50 a week, it's not much." "No," she said, "but I'll take it." I nodded and went out. I don't know what made me do it. I told myself it was practical. The cook's wife had been asking for another pair of hands since September. That was true. But I walked back to my horse and thought about the way she'd looked at me, not waiting for anything, not braced for my face to change when the stutter came, just waiting to see if I was useful or not. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt like a person being considered, rather than a foreman being assessed. For 3 weeks after that we didn't speak beyond necessity. She came to camp on Tuesdays and Saturdays, did the laundry, took her $1.50, went back to a Lamosa. I saw her in passing. Once I helped her heft a tub of wet linens onto the wagon bed, and she said thanks the way you say thanks to a hand tool that works right, not ungrateful, just straight. I liked that. I was 44 years old, and I liked that a woman could speak to me without a single gram of performance in it. The night things changed was the third Tuesday in October. I remember it because I'd had a bad week. A section hand had broken his leg in a slide, and the company had written to say they were cutting crew by 8 men to save on winter costs, and I'd had to decide which 8. That's a thing that sits in your chest like a cold stone. Some of those men had wives. A couple had been with me 4 years. I chose by skill, because that was the only honest way to do it, but skill doesn't make it easier to look a man in the face and tell him to pack his kit. I was sitting outside the foreman's car when Maggie came past with her last load of the day. It was getting dark, the air already sharp with that early winter edge the valley gets, and she had a worn shawl pulled around her shoulders. She glanced at me and read something in my face I thought I had hidden, because she slowed and then stopped. "Hard week," she said. "Had to let 8 men go." She stood there. Didn't say sorry, didn't say that's awful, didn't give me the soft sounds people make when they don't know what else to offer. She just stood there with the shawl around her and looked at the mountains going dark behind the camp. "I worked in a F factory in Dayton," she said after a while. "Wintertime they'd let half the floor go. You'd come in Monday and half the looms were quiet." She paused. "The foreman always looked like you do right now." I looked at her. "That's not didn't mean it as a bad thing," she said. "I meant he carried it, some of them didn't." I didn't say anything right away. Then I said, "You got back inside before this cold gets worse." She went. I sat there another hour in the dark, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I did not feel entirely alone in a thing I was carrying. The note. I should say what I know about it. What Dolers told me months later, over coffee in a Lamosa when I finally thought to ask. Harlan Prout had decided within the first hour. Dolers said she'd heard him tell his foreman the woman was defective. That was the word. She'd overheard it from the kitchen, and she'd gone in and poured Prout's coffee and kept her face and her voice still, because in 11 years she had learned when to be still. But that night, when Prout told the woman to go back, no ceremony, no explanation, just the carriage and the trunk and the depot. Dolers had gone to the writing desk in the hall and torn the corner off a freight manifest that was lying there and written one word and folded it and given $1 to the conductor. I asked her why stay. She said, because she had a good face, because she hadn't done anything wrong, and because Harlan Prout's opinion of a person is not the last word on that person. Then she poured more coffee and changed the subject. November, the first real snow. I was in the yard at Alamosa going over a grade survey with my transit man, Abelino, when I heard the commotion by the freight platform. A horse had gotten loose from a supply wagon, one of those heavy sorrels the company used for hauling, and it had come down off the platform ramp wrong and was thrashing in the traces, going sideways, about to put a wheel through the fence. 3 men were standing back because a horse in that kind of panic is a problem you can lose fingers to. I didn't think about it. I went around behind, got hold of the near-side trace, started talking to the animal the way you talk to something that can hear you but can't think, low and steady and close. It took about 4 minutes. The horse came down, got still, stood blowing hard, and I got the trace free and handed it off. When I turned around, Maggie was on the platform steps. She'd come out of the commissary door. She was looking at me with an expression I didn't know what to do with, not admiration exactly, not surprise, something quieter, like she was filing something away. "You do that before," she said. "Once or twice. You weren't afraid of it." "Afraid of it, and doing it anyway doesn't look different from the outside," I said. She was quiet a moment. "Then it does to the horse." I didn't have an answer for that. I went back to Abelino and the survey, but I thought about it the rest of the afternoon. Afraid of it and doing it anyway doesn't look different from the outside. It does to the horse. She was saying something to me and I knew it, and I didn't reach for it directly. I let it sit. That was my way. We had dinner together the first time on a Friday in December, in the dining room of the Alamosa Hotel. I had asked her, and she had said yes in that straight, clean way she had, and we went and ate beef stew and bread and drank bad coffee and talked for 2 hours. She told me about Ohio, the factory, her sister, a father who had been a school teacher and died young. She told me she'd answered Prout's advertisement in the paper because her sister's husband had made it clear, without ever exactly saying it, that her being there was costing him something. She had no illusions about why she'd come west. She'd needed somewhere to go, and she'd taken the only door that opened. I asked about the stutter, not delicately, just asked. She looked at me across the table for a long moment. "Had it since I was 8, she said. G got bad after my father died, better for a year in my 20s, came B back." "Does it bother you?" "Not the way it be, bothers other people." "I don't mean other people." She considered that. "Sometimes, when I know what I want to say and it takes a minute to get there, like a door that sticks," she paused, "but the door opens." "It does," I said. We looked at each other, and I think that was the moment. Not romantic in the way stories make moments out to be, just a weight settling, like a beam finding its seat. I told her about my wife in January. We were walking along the rail siding east of town, and the afternoon was cold and bright, and she had her hands in her coat pockets, and I was carrying my hat because I'd never been able to wear a hat when the sun was out. I don't know why I told her. It just came out the way things come out when you've been walking beside someone long enough. I told her about the ghost remark, said I thought at the time she was being unkind, and I understood later she was being accurate. Maggie listened. She didn't fill the pauses. "Were you a G-ghost with her," she said, "or just somewhere else?" I thought about it. "I was working," I said. "Always working, not thinking about her, not thinking about her, just the job, the next job. The job after that." "What were you running from?" I stopped walking, she stopped with me. I'd been asked that before by my wife, by a camp doctor who fancied himself a philosopher, by my own mind at 2 in the morning. I'd never had an answer that satisfied. I don't know that I was running, I said finally. I think I just never learned to be still. Working was the only time I felt square. Square, she said. Like the level was right, like I was plumb. She looked out across the siding. I know that feeling. I used to talk too much when I was nervous before the stutter, as if I could get ahead of whatever was coming if I just kept going. She paused. Then I couldn't anymore, had to slow down, learn to sit inside a minute. And it was terrible for a while. She almost smiled, then it wasn't. February brought trouble. The tunnel cribbing at Cerro had been a problem all winter, and in the second week of February it gave. No one was inside when it went, small mercy, but it took out 40 feet of progress and damaged the drill rig, and the company sent a man named Hedgewick down from Denver to assess. Hedgewick was 31 years old and had an engineering degree, and had never in his life set foot in a San Luis winter. He decided the crew had been negligent. He put it in his report that way: negligence in the assessment of the timber condition, negligence in the cribbing spec. That was me. It was my spec. I had walked that rock 100 times. I had increased the timber gauge in November specifically because the ground was moving, and I had documented it in the work log. Hedgewick hadn't looked at the work log. I found out about the report on a Thursday evening. My section chief, a man named Archibald who I had never loved but always respected, came and told me in person, which I appreciated. He said the company was considering disciplinary review, possibly termination. I sat in the foreman's car that night with the lamp burning low and thought about 22 years of work. Every job in on schedule and under estimate. Every crew safe when it was in my power to keep them safe. I thought about Hedgewick's 31-year-old hands and his engineering degree, and his complete ignorance of how ground behaves when the temperature swings 60 degrees between October and February. I thought about my wife saying I was a ghost. I thought about whether she had been right, and whether I had spent 22 years feeding myself to a machine that would spit me out the moment it was convenient. I sent word to Maggie. I hadn't meant to. It was late and I wasn't thinking straight, and I just told the night man to take a note to the commissary in the morning. The note said I needed to talk to someone, and I was sorry to ask. She came at noon. I told her everything. Sitting at the small table in the commissary back room with Mrs. Faber pointedly occupied elsewhere, I laid it out: the blowout, Hedgewick, the report, the 22 years, the part where I didn't know any more if there was anything left on the other side of the job. The part I hadn't told anyone. She listened the whole way through. Then she said, "Do you have the work log?" "Yes." "Can Archibald see it?" "He'd have to ask Hedgewick to request it." "Then you tell Archibald to look at the log. You don't argue the report. You just say, 'Look at the log.'" "That may not be enough." "Maybe not, but it's the truth, and the truth is what you've got." She was quiet a moment. "Emmett, you didn't do anything wrong." It was the first time she'd said my name. I looked at her across that small table. 44 years old, 22 years of driving iron, 1 failed marriage, a report in Denver calling me negligent. And Maggie Walsh, who had been shipped back east like something a man could return, looking at me without a single shred of doubt in her eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said again, quiet, flat, like it was simple. Something in my chest came loose. Not dramatically, not tears or any of that. Just the cold stone I'd been carrying since February eased up a degree, like a door that had been stuck for a long time finally beginning to give. I put my hand on the table. She put hers on top of it. That was all. That was enough. Archibald looked at the log. He went to Cerro himself, on a cold, clear day in the 3rd week of February, And he walked the site, and he looked at the timber gauge I'd specified, and he looked at the ground, and he read the log entry where I'd noted the movement and increased the spec in November. He came back and he wrote a memo. The memo said the cribbing failure was attributable to an unforeseen acceleration in ground movement that had not been predictable from any standard assessment, and that the foreman had in fact taken precautionary measures in advance of the failure. Hedgewick's report was recalled. Archibald told me about it in the yard on a Tuesday, his hat in his hands, which was more deference than I'd seen from him in 4 years. He said the company would be keeping me on. He said, with some discomfort, that they were grateful for the work I'd done on that line. I thanked him and let him go and stood in the yard and breathed the cold air and felt the valley wide around me. The mountains were white and still. The rails ran south out of sight. I went to find Maggie. I told her in the commissary doorway, standing in the thin afternoon sun. She listened, and when I was done she said, "Good." Just that. "Then are you relieved?" "Yes," I said, "and something else." "What?" I looked at her. I thought about the horse on the ramp. Afraid of it and doing it anyway doesn't look different from the outside. It does to the horse. "I want to stop running," I said. She waited. "I don't know how to do it yet, but I want to learn. And I'd like to learn it somewhere you are." The commissary was quiet. The light came in low and pale and lay across the plank floor. Maggie was very still for a moment. Then something in her face changed, not a smile exactly, not right away, something before a smile, a thing that happens in the eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. We were married in April, in the Alamosa courthouse, with Mrs. Faber and Abelino as witnesses. Maggie wore a blue dress she'd sewn herself out of cloth she'd ordered from the dry goods. I wore my good shirt and my least battered hat, which she straightened on my head outside the door and then stood back and looked at me. "Well," she said. "Well," I said. She took my arm. Inside, the clerk read the words. Outside, the valley was greening up, the last of the snowpack gone from the low ground, the mountains still white above it. When it was done, we walked out into that light and stood on the courthouse steps, and Abelino shook my hand for a long time without saying anything, which was better than most speeches. We took a room at the hotel for the night. In the morning, we had breakfast in the dining room, the same table where we'd eaten beef stew in December, and Maggie sat across from me, and the light came in the east window, and she was reading a letter from her sister in Ohio, and her coffee was going cold, and she looked up and caught me watching her. "What?" she said. "Nothing," I said, "just looking." She went back to the letter. Outside, the morning train was moving south, the locomotive sound low and steady through the glass. I drank my coffee. I was, for the first time in a great while, exactly where I was. That note Dolers wrote, "Stay," I saw it once. Maggie had kept it folded in the bottom of her trunk, the pencil gone a little faint. I held it in my hand one evening the winter after we married, the fire going in the small house we'd taken east of town, the wind outside doing what the valley wind does. And I thought about a 31-year-old man with an engineering degree and a form that said negligence. And I thought about Harlan Prout, who owned 11,000 acres and couldn't abide a woman who got caught on a word. I thought about all the things a man can be wrong about. I folded the note and put it back. Maggie was at the table with her ledger, totaling something, her pen moving in that careful hand. The fire popped. The wind was cold outside the walls, and inside it was warm and lamplit, and the woman at the table knew the shape of my flaw and kept it close anyway. I sat down across from her and picked up the paper, and we stayed there a long time, the two of us, in the quiet.